Legal disclaimer. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of Ben and Suz, representing the housing sector and SHAC, and are provided for informational purposes only. This content does not constitute legal advice. Neither the housing sector nor SHAC can be held responsible for any actions taken based on the discussion. Listeners and viewers are encouraged to seek independent legal advice or consult relevant authorities for guidance on specific issues.
Hello, Suz. Welcome to the Housing Sector Podcast, first episode of 2025. I hope you had a good Christmas. Today, we're talking about service charge, and this has been looming for a while now, and it's becoming more and more of a concern. You and I have certainly discussed it. You've got lots of support on your website, on the SHAC website, and it's at the forefront, and I think it's going to be the big battleground for 2025 because I think it's at breaking point and people just can't cope. So as someone who is at the coalface, what is the human element, the ever-increasing service charges? What effect is this happening to people, to families?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely devastating because, well, first of all, I think it's worth just pointing out, because I don't think it's very widely reported, that service charges affect tenants and leaseholders and shared owners. I think there's a bit of a view that actually this is a leasehold issue when it's only leaseholders who pay service charges. But actually, some renters also have a separate charge that's levied to them in a separate bill that is the service charges, whereas some renters, obviously, all of the cost of the service delivery is included in their rent. So it's really affecting quite a wide range of people. And as we know, the service charge costs have gone up massively over the last few years. And, this is quite aside from the kind of what we would see as service charge abuse. But the costs themselves are rising quite dramatically. And what it means is that people who are living even in what would be otherwise considered affordable housing are actually finding that it's not affordable because of these massive service charges and the increases that are applied every year. And the impact of that is as with everything, when it becomes unaffordable, people go into massive arrears. They maybe approach loan sharks to help them. We've heard of people doing that and then getting into difficulty because they can't repay that. People end up homeless. They end up in temporary accommodation. They end up sofa surfing, literally having to abandon their home because they can't afford to live there anymore, just handing the keys back to the landlord or the freeholder just because they cannot afford these service charges. And then that in itself, I mean, the kind of knock-on effect of that is this massive disruption to their lives, because it's very difficult to hold down a job if you haven't got a permanent address. It's very difficult to keep your kids' education stable if you haven't got a permanent address and you're sofa surfing and moving from one place to the next. And we also know that housing worries and inadequate housing, poor housing, all of that costs the NHS millions. In other words, people are actually, becoming physically and mentally ill because of the strain and because of the physical effects of poor housing. So it has a huge impact. It has a huge impact, devastating impact for the people who are affected by it, but also then a knock-on effect to whole communities, really.
And that's why I say it's going to be the battleground, because you see there's so many of these groups, leaseholder groups, shared ownership, cladding groups, and we're all affected by service charge. I think this could be the thing that galvanizes and brings us all together and goes, okay, look, we've got a common enemy here. And I don't like to talk about battlegrounds and enemies, but the impact of these. And when we look at how housing associations seem to be structured and the money they're wasting on training events, corporate events, CEO wages, and I don't want to get into, groping about that, but there has to be some cost savings that must be made internally rather than just passing the cost on through service charge. And I know that there are some very valid reasons as to why service charge is going up. But when residents don't feel that they're getting the service that they're paying for at the best of times, I mean, repairs are going on, are stretching on, and not being catered to, that also leaves a bad taste in people's mouths. How many people well, it's hard to put a figure on it, but do you think that we're going to get to a point where a service charge strike for most people is the only option when they don't want to go through loan sharks, etc.
Yeah, I think looking at what's happened with rent strikes in Britain in the past, and also in other countries in other parts of the world, including America, other parts of Europe. What you see is that once it takes off very fast. It becomes, a really powerful movement. So I think that, that could happen in Britain as well. And we're starting to see more and more people who are interested in exploring this. At the moment, it's very small scale that we've seen. But I think it will get to the point where people, it's not even necessarily that they will want to withhold, they just can't afford it anymore. And so they will look around for how do they then protect themselves against the landlords taking some kind of action against them. And the natural next step is to talk to your neighbours, is to collaborate, is to form a group, is for everyone to do it, everyone to write to the landlord at the same time. So to organise around that. And that's what we are seeing happening. So when we first started supporting people, it would be maybe one or two people or a handful of people on an estate, or even people just doing it individually because maybe they didn't know their neighbours, or their neighbours weren't interested at that time. But what we saw increasingly over time is that it was more about whole groups, much bigger groups on an estate, maybe not everybody, but much bigger groups of people on an estate who were kind of clubbing together and doing it together. So we are starting to see that organisation. And this is something that we really feel where SHAC can add some kind of value. We can help people to do that and help people to organise. So, I think there is, it's happened in other countries. It's happened in the form of rent strikes in the past in Britain. There is absolutely no reason that it wouldn't happen again over this issue, as you say, which is becoming a massive issue. I did just want to kind of add something. You said there are legitimate reasons why service costs are going up. And of course, that's true. We know, for example, there's a lot of pressure on insurance and buildings insurance because of the cladding scandal, which again was not of the making of the people living in those buildings. But there are also lots of illegitimate costs that are being applied. And we're doing some research into service charges, tribunals, tribunal judgments and so on at the moment. And it's really quite shocking to see how many illegitimate costs are being passed on to the people who are winning, their tribunal cases. But that there's a whole estate where those charges will also have been applied. People being charged for things that the landlord never intended to deliver, let alone, just inflated costs for the things they are delivering. And it's really quite shocking to see that. We should be reporting on this in, not too distant future. We hope to sort of produce a report out of the research that we've done. So it really is a massive mess, and government really has to come in and sort of take some control over it, I think.
We have a group here. When they re-estimated our service charge costs, and loan people were getting letters and upset, and we banded together here, a few of us, and that's growing. And it was amazing the effect that suddenly had, rather than one person sending an email and the people that separately sent it, they've not raised it as a complaint. Where when we had the same email that landed on the desk at the same time, the response was, "Yeah, we've made a mistake here. Yeah, we've overcharged it. Yeah, we're recalculating this." So I think there is a safety in numbers, and of course, the more of us that report it and share it, the problem. And I do have some information that I will share with you afterwards via email. So okay, so look, we're a tenant. I'm alone or in a neighbourhood group, and I'm thinking of, I can't afford to pay my service charge anymore, so I'm going to withhold it. What are the steps? First of all, what are the risks to me as a tenant if I withhold this charge?
Yeah, I think it's very important to say at this point, to put in our caveat here, that I'm not a trained legal advisor. So what we're not giving, it can be, should not be, or what the information we're giving should not be taken as legal advice. However,
yes, let's add
we
that.
were very,
nothing here. This is just advice and guidance. You must get your own legal advice before doing any of this. We are just putting an opinion, for collective opinions, if you like. But yes, we are not an authority.
So when we first started supporting people, we were obviously concerned about that, about the risks to individual tenants and residents being leaseholders or shared owners, who have got a lot to lose after all, because tenants can lose their home, leaseholders and shared owners will lose their home and any equity that they've invested in it if they default and the landlord comes after them. So we were really concerned about that, and we got advice, off the record advice from a solicitor on what steps they could take to do it safely. It technically could be seen as a breach of contract. So you could be breaching your contract, which is your lease or your tenancy agreement in this case. If you refuse to make these payments, and therefore the landlord can take the steps that are allowed in law for them to actually recover the costs. And that's where the very first bit of advice, which is the safety in numbers, that really comes in, because they can go after one tenant on an estate of 50 people. To go after 25 tenants and try and evict them on an estate of 50 people is very difficult. And we'll talk about other ways that they can protect themselves as well. One of the second kind of piece of advice, I guess, that we would give is to set that money aside. So what you would be able to do is to go into court and say, it's not that I'm not willing to pay a service charge, and I accept it and I've put this money aside. However, this charge is not legitimate. We are being charged for a lift, but we don't, or lift maintenance, but we don't have a lift. Or we're being charged for a concierge service, but we don't have a concierge. So you're able to show the court that what you're withholding is the bits that you actually are under dispute. Mm. And you would want to be able to show that actually what you've tried to do is every possible opportunity to raise the problem with your landlord. So let them know, be very clear about what the issues are, why you think that the amount that they're charging is not accurate, and be very clear about that and save all of that documentation because you want to rely on it. In reality, what we found is very, very few landlords come after people who refuse to make a payment, who come through SHAC, who kind of include the fact that they are a SHAC member and they've got our support when they are in withholding payments, or where they're doing it as part of a kind of organized grouping. So landlords are very, very reluctant, and we think precisely because of the fear that this will spread, they kind of want to tamp down on it. They don't want to make this an even bigger issue. So again, it's kind of organizing and getting other people involved. So those are, some of the things that people need to think about. It is an individual risk, and you have to be comfortable with the risk, with acknowledging that there is a risk there, and being prepared to sort of face that risk and mitigate it as much as you possibly can, really. But there again, as we've just been saying, just continuing to pay at ever increasing amounts, that also puts you at risk of losing your home, doesn't it? So it's really balancing up.
And you mentioned, government and councils, local support. We've had completely no response at all from Annalise Dobbs, our MP here. None at all. Oh, well, yeah, you can just complete waste of time. What support is there from government? I mean, surely, my argument to Annalise Dobbs was, hang on a minute, you've got a housing association who's admitted making mistakes and overcharging in the first round when we pushed back on the first round. So that's having an impact on the Oxford budget for, housing benefits, universal credit, that is service charges being paid for. What are you doing about it? And there was no response.
Yeah. I mean, it's really disappointing with Annalise Dobbs now that they're actually in government, especially that she hasn't done anything about it, and she hasn't responded to any of the SHAC correspondence either. I have to say, you're not alone, Ben, in being ignored by her. Yeah. So it's very disappointing, but it is very important that people contact their MPs and their councillors and keep them copied into any correspondence, and explicitly ask them, as you did, because you've sent us obviously some of the correspondence with Annalise Dodds, but specifically asking them very explicitly, very clearly to intervene on your behalf, because their office, whether it's the council or whether it's your MP, they can actually contact the chief executive of the landlord and start having those conversations with them. And it might, in some cases it does, nudge the landlord into being more responsive, into engaging. And again, that's something, if in the very unlikely event you went to court, you are again able to show that you've tried every possible route, including the political route, and getting your politicians involved in trying to solve the dispute before you go into court.
Yeah.
You haven't just jumped into going into court.
No, that's brilliant. Okay, so look, SHAC is offering support to people who are choosing to do this. So, as someone that's coming to you, what can I expect from SHAC?
Yeah, I mean, we don't do individual casework or advocacy, but what we'll do is we will advise people. We've got, guidance on how to do it as safely as possible. So we've got a checklist kind of setting out all the things that we've been talking about. We also suggest sometimes writing, if you can, write to your landlord in advance. So say, if you don't respond to me, if you won't, engage with me before such and such a date, maybe a month from now, then I'm going to start withholding. So again, you're giving them a warning. You're saying, I don't want to do this, but if you won't engage with me and help settle these, where there's all this confusion or inaccuracy in my service charges, then I've got no other option. So you're really doing it as a last resort. And that can work quite well. And sometimes, again, it's just enough to prompt the landlord. So we've got template letters and template emails that people could just download, put their own details in, and then send it off to the landlord, whether they're kind of giving notice that they're going to start withholding payment or they're already withholding payment. We've got the two options, as well as a little checklist for everything, including all of the things that we've talked about. And we can also help with, if people haven't done, I mean, I'm a seasoned campaigner, done a few too many campaigns really. But for a lot of people, that's completely new. They know what the problems are, but they don't know how to go about kind of, getting a little campaign group together and getting a campaign going. And that's something we can give loads of advice on. That's really, again, where we feel we sort of add value, is that we can advise them on how to do it. If they need leaflets printed, we can help with printing them. If they wanted a banner, we could help with getting a banner together, get a banner ordered for them. So we can help them with a lot of the kind of practical things about organising their neighbourhood, their community, whichever group that they're trying to put together, and the practical steps about how to go about that. So this is where I think we can really help them, and all of that is just available for free to download from our website.
Links will be in the description, and there's been QR codes popping up here, so we've got all of that union fug. I like that. So we'll do all of that. All those links will be there for people to follow, and please reach out, Ben at Housing Sector. I can pass on Sue's details and SHAC's details. So the important message is you're not in it alone. And one thing that I know about housing associations is they can deal with you on your own and keep you quiet and out the way. The more of you, the harder it is, and they hate the bad publicity. Hence the fact that they spend so much on communications. Okay, so we've got people together. We're galvanizing. Let's say we have 25% of the country go on a service charge strike. My fear then, and I mentioned it in a blog that I wrote a couple of days ago, service charge breaking point. There is a very real risk to the housing associations that if we all stop paying our service charge and putting it somewhere safe so it's there, and then the courts go, well, these costs aren't valid, you have overcharged here, that they're going to implode on themselves. They're going to be unable to put money back into new builds. They'll be unable to maintain and support the buildings under their current legislation. They won't be able to maintain them, and the whole system collapses. Where are we then?
Yeah, I mean, no, that's not going to happen, really, is it? Because what people are saying, and people are reasonable. They know that cleaning the communal areas is going to cost money. They know that they're going to have to contract with a cleaner or a window cleaner or grounds maintenance. The building needs to be insured in case something happens. There needs to be fire safety in the building. So people are reasonable about stuff like that. What we're talking about are people withholding a disputed amount where they either can't get the information about what the charge is for, which is shockingly common, or it's a very, it's an extortionate charge, or it just really shouldn't apply, as in the lift maintenance example that we gave earlier. So we're not talking about people not paying any cost towards the delivery of the services. What would happen, and it's like any strike action where you would withhold your labour. The aim is not to be on strike. The aim is to get the employer back around the negotiating table on a bit more of a level playing field when it comes to the power balance between you. And that's what we're looking at here. So they would have to negotiate. And one of the things that we would like to see that would be top of our list for kind of negotiation. So the idea is that it would bring the landlord around the negotiating table, as it were, so that we would be able to kind of rebalance things really in favor of tenants and residents. And one of the things we would like to see is that the courts, where there is a disputed charge, which wouldn't be, we would hope, the whole of your service charge, it would be a certain element of it. But if there is some under dispute, it could be paid to the courts and then only paid on to the landlord if the landlord can actually show that they have genuinely incurred that cost.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't, we're not talking about, landlords would lose all of the income from service charges. The other thing we'd like to see is, and this affects shared owners as well as renters, clarity about what does your rent cover. So, landlords are taking this payment, in the form of rent from shared owners, from full renters. What does that cover? Because what we've started seeing is the rent has gone up, but then the service charge, the list of service charge items for a lot of people who pay an additional service charge, the list is getting longer as well. So they're taking things out of the, rent, if you like, and putting them into a separate service charge list, but without the rent going down. So what does your rent actually cover? And we would argue, obviously, things like fire safety compliance, that should be standard part of your rent. It shouldn't be a separate service charge item. Buildings insurance shouldn't be a separate service charge item. If you are paying rent, that should come out of your rent. Otherwise, what is the rent for? You might as well just have the whole thing as service charges.
And residents, and I think this is a myth that most residents don't believe, residents are entitled to this information. They can request this information and find out where their money's going and how it's being spent. And again, I'll put QR codes and links in the description. So, there has to be a level of transparency here, which shouldn't be this hard to come by. Okay, so now we know that there are certain CEOs who do watch these podcasts and certain senior leaders. If you had a message to them now saying, look, I might think we need to work together on this. We can't just keep throwing money good after bad. What would your message to the senior leaders of housing associations regarding service charge be, Suz?
I think the first thing would be come and talk to us, because we have been engaging with tenants and residents, and if they are genuine about wanting to solve the issues, if they genuinely only want to charge legitimate costs to their tenants and residents, come and talk to us, because we can tell them where the pinch points and the problem areas are. That could save them a lot of time. So come and get feedback from us. With the other ones, I think, what we'd say to them, look, if you don't sort your houses out, if you don't sort your service charge accounts out, you will be leading up to some kind of mass strike action, we believe, that people just can't go on forever paying more and more and more in their service charges. And really, but I really think that our message has to be to government, doesn't it? Because it's really government that's going to have to get to grips with this, I think.
Yeah. Let's see if we can get a few MPs on here around to have a discussion, because it's in their interest. This is what we put them up for. Okay, Suz, look, it's been another fascinating chat. Let's catch up again in a few weeks. I'll drive anyone there. And, if you're a housing association CEO, for God's sakes, reach out, talk to people like Suz or myself, who are listening to residents, because it's clear there is a gap here. There's a breakdown in communication. And although I think a lot of housing associations are quite readily happy to sit back and go, well, we'll let the legal fees do it. We've got all the lawyers in. Let's talk first, because I know from experience that if you haven't engaged in mediation, it's frowned upon by a judge. So let's go that way. All right, Suz, that's great. Thank you very much indeed. Have a good day.
You too. Thank you.